Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 2007 Brazilian action drama thriller Elite Squad. Now, before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on this film, I want to give a special shout out to Leon for requesting this review. And if there's another film, TV show, or topic that you'd like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to either my PayPal or to my Patreon. The link to both is in the video description down below, and I will try to get to your request as soon as I possibly can. Now, Elite Squad is a film that I had heard about because it had gotten some good reviews over the years, and I knew it was a film that the director of the RoboCop remake directed, José Padilha, and it was one of the reasons why he even got the job for that film in the first place. So, admittedly, I was a little bit curious to see whether or not this guy really had any talent to begin with, because he sure as hell didn't display it in the RoboCop remake. And, well, I wasn't really a big fan of this film. I will say that there are some parts of it and some aspects of the film that are pretty solid, pretty good, decent in their own right. And one of them was the direction. I think Jose did a really good job. I think it's a well directed film. It definitely has this boots on the ground, uh, raw realism to it when it comes to the direction. It helps when it comes to the few action scenes that there are in the film because of the way that the shots are directed. It really does put you right there in the midst of all of the gunfire and the action. And I think it creates a pretty effective mood and atmosphere for the most part as well. There's some shaky cam, but it's not too obnoxious. There definitely is a sense of purpose and a balanced approach to the direction. There's definitely talent behind the camera. Jose is absolutely working and managing to showcase a clear plan visually when it comes to his shot selection, when it comes to the techniques that he's employing, whether it's a pan or a zoom or a POV shot or a wide shot. So, yeah, I think from a directing standpoint, it's a pretty solid film. And I think the direction is one of the main reasons why I think the movie wound up getting some praise in the States. Apparently, there are a lot of people, though, that did not like this at all. Like, I remember seeing some good reviews, but I also remember reading a lot of stuff where people were very vitriolic about this movie. And I think in large part it has to do with the script and the politics. But there was a lot of praise for the direction, and rightfully so. I think Jose did a really good job with it. It makes me think that maybe the RoboCop remake wasn't necessarily a failure in large part due to him. It's in large part due to the fact that that idea was just a bad idea from the start, and he was just a director who was given the job. He took it because he wanted to get his uh, uh, stamp on the film industry. You know, he wanted to get his foot into the door when it comes to Hollywood, and he wasn't really able to have as much creative control. He wasn't really able to do everything he wanted to do with it because he essentially was just a puppet for the studio. The studio was like, "All right, now you're gonna do this, you're gonna do that. We don't want you to do this," and he just went along with it, hoping that it would somehow be a success, and then that would lead to him getting more opportunities. But that's not what happened. So after seeing this film, like, I see that Jose was definitely a guy who wasn't completely incompetent when it comes to his ability to direct. Now, the film has a script by Braulio Mantovani, Jose Padilla, and Rodrigo Pimentel. It's based on a novel called Elite de Tropa by Andre Batista, Luis Eduardo Soares, and Rodrigo Pimentel. And I think the script is definitely what led to this getting some very harsh reviews from critics here in the States, in America, because its politics are very different compared to what a lot of people here in the United States are privy to or used to. And it doesn't really paint the police in the most positive light. And it also has one of those screenplays where everyone is pretty much just one variation of being an awful person. So there really isn't a clear cut hero or even a clear cut villain. So everyone is an antagonist and a protagonist at the same time. And I think that's definitely something that a lot of people, a lot of audiences in the United States and even elsewhere aren't really big on. And in all honesty, I'm not either. That's one of the things that I really didn't care for about this film is that there's no one to root for. So it becomes a slog to sit through because there's no everyone is some degree of corrupt, some degree of unhinged or too violent or too gun crazy. The people that you might have a little bit of sympathy for, they don't really have that much screen time and aren't really a major focus of the plot. So it does get difficult to really get that involved in the story. It also doesn't help that the story is just all over the place. There's no central conflict, there's no central story. It's a multitude of different varying storylines and subplots that are just loosely tied together. And City of God had a lot of subplots and a lot of characters, but the way that it handled everything was brilliant. Everyone's subplot, everyone's backstory, everyone's place in the film was compelling. It's the complete opposite when it comes to Elite Squad. A lot of these characters, especially other members of the Elite Squad and other members of the police, there's really nothing to them in terms of their characterization. It's very paper thin or bare bones, and they don't really have a lot of charm or personality in the script to make up for it. So you just have a film that, from a story perspective and from a script perspective, it's just all over the place. So you think that it might be about this elite squad trying to make this favela in Brazil safe for the arrival of the Pope, but that's not really the main plot line. That's like way, way, way down the list, and is maybe only like 10 to 15 minutes of screen time. You think that it might be about the corruption in the police and how corrupt everything is to a ridiculous degree to the point where it almost seems like it's a dark comedy. But no, that's only for a little bit. You think that it's going to be about stuff that's going on in this high school where there's some drugs that are being dealt and there's an undercover police officer who's there and he's trying to clean things up, but he also falls for this girl that teaches at the school. So you're thinking then that's what the focus is going to be. No, it's not. You think and then you think, okay, it's going to be about this elite squad, right? It's going to be about the elite squad, the Bope squad, and various different events or moments where they get involved and they have to find some thugs or criminals and take them out. And there's some big head of some gang that they have to stop by the end of the movie. No, that's not it either. I think what it is trying to be is it's trying to be a script that is very critical of the police and Bope and in some ways hyper masculinity, and show like how over the top that is, and how destructive it can be, but that doesn't really come across that clear. But I kind of get what they're trying to go for with this captain of the Bope squad, uh, um, Nashimento. He's the captain in the Bope squad. He's trying to get a promotion and leave the Bope squad so he can be with his wife and his kid who's about to be born or is just born, and he's trying to find his replacement. And okay, if that is the focus, then why wasn't that really the focus from the beginning and the main central conflict throughout the entirety of the script? It's not, though. It comes and goes, and then like after like an hour and 10 minutes, then that's like the main focus of the entire story. And I'm like, okay, so now you're focusing on him finding his replacement, him doing this training camp for BOPE officers or would be BOPE officers that looks like something out of the Alpha Male boot camp. And that's when the story and the script actually got interesting to me. I was like, okay, this is interesting. This is different. The BOPE training camp. You have all these other characters that had little bit parts or little brief moments throughout the previous amount of time when it comes to the story. So now they're being brought in here, and I'm like, okay, well, that should have just been the entirety of the film. It should have just been about the captain trying to find his replacement. You briefly introduce the people who are going to be a part of this BOPE training camp. You have like maybe a sequence in the beginning establishing the elite squad and having them take out some drug dealers, showing their propensity for violence, showing them really pushing the boundaries in terms of what should be appropriate police a procedure or behavior, showing the corruption of the police and like a montage or something, and showing the captain with his wife at home and showing that he's dealing with mental health issues because of all the things that he's been tasked to do, and the weight of everything that he's doing. And then the rest of the movie is just a BOPE training camp. It's like a demented police academy that's also being a satire of hypermasculinity, the police, and all this other stuff. And then it culminates with a sequence in the end where they have to protect the Pope from the crime that's in the favelas. And then you could also make it a critique on religion when you have some of the stuff with the Pope or something. That would have been a lot more interesting to me and definitely would have been a lot more satisfying overall when it comes to the screenplay. Because it's just so scatterbrained. It's like, okay, we're going to start like in the now with this scene at a club and somebody gets shot and there's this cop and there's a lead squad that's coming in, and then we're gonna go backwards and now it's 6 months before that, and then we're gonna briefly establish some characters and establish the corruption in Brazil, especially specifically with the police, and then we're gonna do this whole stuff with this school, this high school, and this undercover stuff, and then we're gonna go from that, and then we're gonna go into a family drama with the captain and his wife, and then we're gonna have this other guy who works as a mechanic who wants to be a BOPE, who then winds up becoming a part of the BOPE training camp. Then we're gonna focus mostly on the BOPE training camp for like 30 minutes of runtime. Then we're gonna have the moment where they graduate, and the captain has second thoughts and has doubts about his chosen pick to replace him. Something happens with this guy that also relates to what Matthias, who's the character who's undercover, at the school who fell for this woman, and something happens with him because he gets found out about being undercover, and so the guy who's the head of the drug empire that's selling drugs to the school, he then wants to get revenge on Matthias, but instead it's this guy named Neto, who was the captain's pick to replace him. He winds up getting killed instead of Matthias. And so there's a funeral, and then you have this whole thing where Matthias is now trying, along with the captain, they're taking extreme measures to try to find this guy who killed Neto, because that's the only way that the captain's going to be able to show that he's worthy of getting a promotion and getting out of this. And so they go to extreme measures and go door to door, and eventually they get the guy and they shoot, and Matthias shoots him in the head, which is the last thing that he needed to do to show that he can be the one to replace the captain, because Neto is no longer around. And that's basically it when it comes to the script. I appreciate its ability to pull no punches. I do appreciate that. I appreciate that it's willing to go for the jugular. It's willing to be violent. It's willing to be vicious. Like the scene where the drug dealer kills these two people from the school and shoots this one woman in the head and then burns this guy alive. It's pretty intense, but it still doesn't make that character really that compelling or interesting. It just makes his actions very vicious and memorable, but it doesn't make the character memorable. So I think that was nice to see, but it was something that was rather fleeting because it doesn't match with a villain that is really that compelling, or really that much of a antagonist overall, because everyone is the antagonist in this. And a lot of it has these moments where it seems like it's taking a comic approach, which I also appreciated, but it's also something that is fleeting. It doesn't really stick with that. I think it should have been a dark comedy. It should have been a dark comedy about the absurd amount of corruption in Brazil, especially when it comes to the police and how absurdly violent they are, and contrasting that with maybe, some the Pope and stuff like that, and showing how people react to the Pope coming to Brazil, um in terms of, the Pope's policies and what he preaches. But then you have like the cops, and they're doing all this stuff where they're putting bags over people's faces and essentially torturing them. um that would have created an interesting dynamic. And then maybe you could also have some satire of the religion too, because you're like, okay, there's all this stuff happening with the police and then the corruption, but you're not doing anything about it. You just want them to protect you so you don't wind up getting shot in the favelas when you decide to stay in the slums, because you're doing some good for the community. So, like, I would appreciate a little more contrast, a little more dynamic when it comes to the script, when it comes to its themes, when it comes to its subtext. You didn't really get that. And like I said, there really isn't a central figure or central person in this plot that you really connect with on a deeper level. So it just becomes very superficial in terms of how it's able to resonate with you. So I like the idea. I like the concept of dealing with the Bope squad. I like the Bope training camp concept. I like some of the elements of this script, but it just doesn't come together in the end. Now, the film, I think, features a pretty decent cast. I think Wagner Moura, for instance, as Roberto, the captain of the Bope squad, I thought he did a really great job playing this role. He was believably intense and just unhinged and angry and violent when he needed to be, but he also showed a side that was more vulnerable. Him with his mental breakdowns, him showing his stress really causing him some genuine issues, causing him to have some panic attacks, the relationship between him and his wife, and you really got the sense of desperation when it comes to him trying to get out of Bope. And a lot of ways, he kind of reminded me of Ray Liotta when it comes to his intensity, which is a great thing. When you remind somebody of Ray Liotta in his prime, that's a pretty good performance. I think Caio Junqueira was also pretty solid as Neto, a guy who is groomed to be the captain's successor, but he's even more of a psycho. And I think Cal definitely did display those traits rather well. Um, André Ramiro, he plays Matthias, who's the law student who's going undercover. He did a pretty good job as well. I thought, especially when it comes to him showing the different nuances of his character, the character being shy and reserved initially, and a rookie police officer who's just trying to stay undercover in this school and have a relationship with this teacher, but then he becomes a BOPE officer and he becomes all the way more violent and way more prone to angry outbursts and intimidation, and he did a good job showing both aspects of that character. Maria Ribeiro, who played the captain's wife, she was fine in the few scenes that she had. She's arguably the most sympathetic character out of anyone in this plot because she has to deal with her husband all the time. She just wants to have a safe place to raise her kid. She wants her husband to be there, but she sees what the toll that this job is taking on her husband. And when something happens in Neto and there's all this stuff that's going on and it's throwing a wrench into the plans for him to be able to move up and get out of this, she leaves him because she's like, I can't take this anymore. And you really can't blame her because he was getting violent with her. And that's another reason why the captain is just not really that great of a character. But I think that's the point. He's flawed, but you don't really see enough good in him to really make it into a character that you root for or care about his redemption. And he doesn't really get redemption anyway, so it's like, okay, what was really the point here? But I still think the actress did a good job for what she was asked to do. So did Fernanda Machado, the law student. Now it could have been, I said high school, but it could be just school or college. Um, it looked like a high school. It looked like a high school to me. It didn't necessarily look like a college campus, but it close enough. But she's a law student. She's a founding member of the NGO. She falls in love with Matthias, and then eventually the two are torn apart because of everything that's going on with Matthias and Bope. And you got Andre DeMaro plays Pedro, who's a student who works in the NGO and dates Roberta. Yeah, Paolo Viello is Edu, the playboy. Fabio Lago is Biano. He's a ruthless drug lord. Like, I did a good job playing a drug lord. Like, you definitely didn't want to be on this guy's bad side. Like, he was barely in the movie. I felt bad for that actor because he didn't really have barely anything to do. Wasn't really much of a focus in the film. He didn't really show up until like over an hour in anyway. And then you got Marcelo Valle, who plays Captain Oliveira. He's a superior in the police force who's taken from the people. Then you have Fabio Lago, who played. There's also this other guy who plays Fabio. Because there's an actual Fabio who plays Biano, but then there's this other guy who plays a character named Fabio. And this Fabio guy, I don't remember. He's not listed here on the Wikipedia credits. But anyway, Fabio is this guy who. Oh, there it is. He is listed. Milhem Cortaz. He's Captain Fabio Barbosa. And he's a guy who is tired of not getting the extra protection money that he had in the past because this other superior is taking it all for himself, and so he devises this plan to steal the money from the superior. And he ultimately is a guy who isn't boat material and quits. And I thought he did a good job playing his role. Like, this is a guy who in a lot of ways is a total jerk off, but he did it in a way that was kind of entertaining because he had some, there was a little bit of charm there compared to some of the other characters who were playing these corrupt police officers. But yeah, it's not a bad cast by any means. It's a pretty decent cast overall. The cinematography by Lula Carvalho is fine for what it is. So is the editing by Daniel Resende. The music by Pedro Bromfman. Can't really say a whole lot about it because there's not really a whole lot about the score that is that memorable or really anything that sticks with you. It's just kind of in the background and doesn't really add or necessarily detract to a scene. It's just there. There's some interesting songs in the soundtrack, though. There's an REM song. There's a dance number. There's a scene where I believe it's the captain. Could be the captain or Neto. I forgot exactly who it was. I think it's the captain and his wife, and they're dancing to REM's "Shiny Happy People," which was intriguing. That was interesting because that's the only American song you hear on the soundtrack. Everything else is just Brazilian songs by Brazilian performers. It's like 115 minutes and it drags. It really does because it doesn't really have an engaging central conflict throughout. The characters aren't really that strong or that well developed most of the time. And if they do have extra depth, they just turn out to be just pieces of shit. And yeah, it's just one of those films that it just wasn't for me at the end of the day. Like, it's worth at least one watch just to see Jose's direction and to see some of the performances and to get a different perspective on things, on a different culture. But I can't really say that I was a big fan of this. I would say if you're into this kind of film, check it out sometime because maybe it'll wind up doing more for you than it did for me. But yeah, that's just my thoughts on Elite Squad. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later. See ya.